I am Brother Lucas, or Lucas, of the Scribal Workshop, and I'm here to explain to you what I do. I am a scribe. A scribe and an illuminator. For those that don't know what that is, I am the medieval equivalent of a printing press. So what I do in modern times is I recreate medieval art and medieval books. I do so using entirely authentic medieval materials and techniques. I make everything that I use, from my ink to my paints to my knife to my parchment. About 50% of the parchment that I use I make myself. All of those are things to work with and things to write on. So my quest today is actually to explain to you how that process works. So my passion is actually learning about and recreating historic manuscripts. So let's start with the process and explain to you how that begins. So the first step of that process is parchment. So parchment is actually made from animal skin, and if you look very, very closely, which you probably can't see, you can actually still see the hair follicles on this skin. This is a skin of parchment from a goat. I don't know the goat personally. But parchment is made by dehairing skin and stretching it on a frame. So to do that, you soak it in lime, which is calcium hydroxide, for between 3 days and a week. You then take that, stretch it on that frame, scrape the hair off, and thin it by various things with pumice and knives and such as that. So once you have the parchment, you then cut that parchment down to the shape and size you would need for a book. And so this is a fairly small book. Actually, for the period, it was probably just under average. So once I've made the parchment, I then have to draw lines on that parchment. The lining process can be done with either a blind point, so something like a bronze stylus, or the back of the knife can be done, which just marks a line into it. It can be done with a lead stylus, or at times it would be done with a quill and Brazil wood ink, or some sort of ink like that, which gives you a sort of contrast to that. Once I've put the lines on and the lines to guide me, I would then write on it. And the writing occurs with a quill. Typically I use a goose quill cut from one of the first 3 wing feathers on each wing, and left-handed for right-handed people and right-handed for left-handed people, but frankly I'm right-handed and this is a left-handed this is a right-handed wing feather, but it doesn't actually matter because I cut them very short. The reason for that is because it can poke you in the eye when you're working. I use ink that I've made from oak galls and iron, and wine and gum arabic and vinegar, and lots of time and soaking and rotting and things like that are involved. I keep it in an ink horn in my writing slope, and then I work on this slope, sometimes another slope, but this slope is my favorite because it is one of the first authentic pieces that I actually made myself. I use a quill knife to cut all of my goose quills. You can also use turkey or swan or something like that, but I've found goose to be very satisfactory. So I use my quill knife to cut my quills, to clean my parchment, as well as to hold my parchment steady as I write on it. So once it's been written on, I'll then go to illumination. The illumination is the painting and the gold work. Depending upon which time period I'm working on, you either put the gold down first or the gold is the very last thing you do. I make all of my paints using historic pigments. This one is cinnabar or vermilion, which is mercury-based pigment. This is the very typical lead white. This is an arsenic sulfide. This one's the most likely to kill me. Plant-based things like indigo and woad, as well as ultramarine blue, which historically comes from lapis lazuli. And so then that's done to paint and illuminate and do all of the gold work. on manuscripts and shows you a bit of what goes on and how that works. So that's kind of the outline of what I do and how it's done. So what I'd like to do now is actually show you some examples specifically of work that I have done and work that I'm doing right now in process. So illuminated manuscripts. I do single pages as well, but I think the thing that I'm the most proud of are the complete books that I've done. And so I'd like to show you some of those in order that I've made them. This first one is a pocket manuscript. It's actually modeled after a 7th century piece, 6th or 7th, called the Stonyhurst Gospel. And it is, instead of being the Gospel of John, it is in fact the epistles of John, the letters of John. And it is has a Coptic binding and has covered in leather, goatskin parchment, and everything is handwritten with a goose quill using the iron ball ink that I make. So let's look inside. So this is the front cover. Inside is an inscription that helps to guide you. You can see the way the text is written. You can also see the pinpricks that show you how the guidelines are laid out. The text itself is a fairly simple text. It's very historic text. It's an unseal. There are also plenty of spaces between chapters. You can see the binding working there as well. And so the next book that I'd like to show you is this one. And so this was the second book that I completed. It is a Carolingian binding, which is a little later period, but it's an insular book. And so insular books are, the most famous ones are the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Book of Kells. And so this is a small copy of the Book of Jonah in both Latin and English, illuminated in the style of the Book of Kells. So you can see that this is much more elaborate, including the binding. There's full knotwork panels, full hardware that's been built into it. The first page would be considered a gospel writer page, but it's not a gospel writer, so this is Jonah. Then you have a carpet page, an incipit page that starts the text. And you also have on every single page, there are various creatures and figures and illumination and painting. Every chapter break has some large block of knotwork or artwork. This one is a slightly different style. I tried my best to mix and match the different styles from the different illuminators in the Book of Kells. Some were more rectangular shapes, some were more fluid shapes. You also have, again, more pages. Every single page in here is painted or illuminated, and then you have the transition into the English section. English section itself is much simpler illumination, mostly just orange dots. So the book I created after that is Psalm 119. So this project in this small box actually started kind of as a joke. My mom said, "Hey, why don't you do Psalm 119? That's only the longest chapter in the Bible." And I thought, hey, why not? It actually turned out to be more words than I'd ever written in a book before. But I had actually started, didn't actually do the word count or figure out what it was, and I started it on scraps of parchment. And ended up with a very, very tiny Gothic binding. So hardware all made by me, again, same as the last one, all on oak boards that I hand carved, on split leather cords, and it is the chapter of Psalm 119. So let's look inside. There's the binding and the hardware that's built into it. You can see the cords, and you can see how thick that is compared to the size of the book. When you open it, the only page with a full painting or miniature on it is this first page. It's about 1 inch high, and it's David fighting a lion. All of the pages, as you flip through, each significant section break has a large golden capital. Majority of it is vermilion and ultramarine for the colors. So those three are the three that I have completed and bound and finished. The ones I'm currently working on. So there's two that are in progress right now that I have sitting here. These two are the Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, and the Gospel of Mark. So first is the Song of Songs. So this one I have actually completed all of the writing and am about a third of the way through doing all of the drawing for the illumination. I haven't put any gold or any paint on this yet, but it will, I'll show you where it is now anyway, and we'll look through and I'll kind of explain some of the things about it. So let's take a look. So just kind of showing you the outside, the first set has fully illuminated borders, which will be covered in gold. You'll have a miniature in that window area. Every single page as you flip through has something on it. Some of them are just capitals, but there's vine work on many of the other ones. Most of them have some sort of vine work, some more elaborate than others. This will all get painted and gilded with gold. There will be a few additional miniatures of various creatures. You can see this one I've laid down the underdrawing, but haven't quite inked over it yet on the right hand side. Much of the rest of it you can just see that there's empty space waiting for miniatures to be painted or for capitals to be added to that. This is modeled after a Paris Pocket Bible. It's not an entire Bible though, this is just going to be the Gospel of Mark, but it is sized with the lettering heights and lettering style and things modeled after the Paris Pocket Bibles made 12th through 13th century or so, and they would fit an entire Bible into something that would fit in your pocket. There's not much to this at this point. You can mostly just see how very small the letters are. The total line height spacing is about 2.5 millimeters. And so there's lots of space for capitals to be added in this style, but there's not a lot of miniatures or anything like that in this. It's mostly just a few colored capitals. So those are the 5 books that I'm in right now. I also make entire manuscript pages. I do a lot of those on commission. Probably the majority of the commission work I do is actually single pages. We also, in addition to making entire bound books and the illuminated pages that I have, we make all kinds of tools to produce your own work. And so whether that's hand-cut authentic quills and historic inks, all the way up to fountain pens and fountain pen inks. We have quills that have steel nibs to make things a little bit easier. We also have a more classic dip pen, historic inks, fountain pen inks. We also make and sell journals, all based on historic styles. So they're all modeled specifically after very specific manuscripts or series of manuscripts from different ages. So we